Oh, hey. So today, wow, I don't even know where to fucking begin. I'm doing this right off the top of my head, but fix that piece of shit. All right. So today will be a review for the new album Autotheism by the Faceless. Now, Faceless belong to a category of metal bands, particularly in the extreme genre, as death metal, technical death metal, to people's eyes. Now, there's a couple different ways and a couple different ways, as I said, that technical death metal is approached and how people like it. There's the kind of traditional sense, where I'm talking very early with bands like Cynic, Atheist, and Death, where they blended ideas of progressive rock, jazz, even some electronica into their music. Uh, and that was the earliest form of technical death metal because it still contained that heaviness and those extreme vocals, but more ideas to help make those bands create landmark albums that inspired countless other bands after them. Then you have a bit more of the brutal sense where the technicality is coming literally off of sheer technicality, not so much as the melody, but the amount of notes and how songs are structured and created with a very raw aggression and design. Bands such as the early Spawn Possession, Origin, of course, and even Suffocation, and Dying Fetus. Then you have some bands that take also a little bit of neoclassical influence, like Necrofascist. Then you have what I call a straight up technical band. This band really doesn't have too much of a solid structure, but they do have. This is basically what I say about them. Musically, they're pure shit. Instrumentally, they're pure talent. Bands, like Necrofascist, Vernana, if I'm saying that name right, those sort of bands. Uh, where this band falls under is kind of more of the traditional sense. This is a band that employs a lot of things of progressive rock ideas, a lot of melody, and a lot of use of keyboards and orchestral elements, aka Faceless, like I've said before. They're pretty much one of my favorite bands of all time. Unfortunately, this is the only album I own by them. This is Planetary Duality. Um, when the Faceless first came onto the scene, they had an album which I will not try to pronounce its name for because I will fuck it up so bad. But they basically became huge within the time. At the time, technical death metal was just starting to see a resurgence, with bands like Dying Fetus, Necrofascist starting to all get much more popular with a newer scene and a newer audience. And basically, these guys were kind of right smack dab in the middle. As soon as their album came out, they started getting tours. They're pretty much. I'm surprised they haven't been a headliner of Summer Slaughters, but I think they've done it 4 times, more than any other band there, I think, with the exception of maybe Necrofascist. Um, they've got a lot of credibility and respect from the metal community for their virtuoso guitar playing, an excellent sense of melody and progression within all of their albums. So their first album showed off the band as still young, still needs some polish. They had tons of elements of techno death metal, some progressive elements that came from like bands like Atheist. They had a couple of more experimental ideas, like the title track had a vocoder, and Pestilence had clean vocals coming from guitarist Michael Keenan. Um, and that basically propelled them. They got on Summer Slaughter '07 when he came back in the States with a bunch of other huge name bands like at the time like Cow Decapitation, Sephaltic Carnage, and Necrofascist. So this was a really good platform for them. Eventually, they basically became one of the biggest technical death metal bands in the underground. Then came this album, Planetary Duality. Basically took what they did on their first album one step further, cut the fat, and made them essentially a coldly calculated machine of just pure awesomeness. I don't even know where to begin on this album. Tracks like Prison Born, The Ancient Covenant, Xenochrist, Legions of Serpents, all fantastic tracks that show off their progressive elements mixed in with those classic tech death elements that basically propel them to almost mainstream stardom within like the extreme metal community, if that's even possible. But enough talk about their backstory. Let's get on to their main album, Autotheism. Now, since their last release nearly 5 years ago, uh, Planetary Duality, a lot of things have changed. Every original member, with the exception of Michael Keenan, has left the band. Uh, Recently, their vocalist, Demon Carcass, as I know his name, I think his first name is David, not sure. And I was a little bit worried what they were going to do vocally, because Demon Carcass, if anybody heard him on a song like Ghost of a Stranger, he's just a fucking beast. And I was a little bit worried, so they have a new vocalist, new guitarist, new bassist, Basically, the whole lineup dissolved. Drummer basically was one of the only members left, but even he's not an original member. He came in at Planetary Duality. So 5 years have passed. Last year we got our first glimpse of the album with a pre-production track called the Eidon Reality, which was pretty good. I have to admit, it was a bit more in a straightforward sense. It didn't pose a lot of Michael's clean vocals, which saw that they were definitely going to change things up this time. So, Autotheism has come out, and I'm literally saying this right now, hands down, one of the best albums of this year. I'm trying to keep the fanboyism to a minimum, but I don't even know where to begin. So let's start with the three-part epic. This is easily, I'll go with Mr. Campbell's work on this, easily the best thing Michael Keenan has ever done with his career in the direction of this band, since it's basically become the Michael Keenan project, plus the members. Autotheist movements, chapters 1 through 3. Let's start with the first one called Create. Create is kind of like nourishing your way into it, where the last album had Prison Born, which was almost a technical grindcore song, if you think about it. It was really fast and didn't play a lot of melody. Basically a kick in the face. This one's a complete opposite. This one is much more melodic, especially for an opener. It's very slow paced. It has actually growl vocals, which is weird. But what you will see, along with the rest of this album, is a lot of Michael Keenan's clean vocals. And this really shows on this track. He has sort of a Devin Townsend vibe in his voice, which is great because there were clean vocals, like even on Planetary Duality. I think it's not the Asian Covenant. Coldly Calculated Design. I think another song I think was Sons of Benile. Both had his clean vocals, including Pestilence off the first album, and you could see that he had a nice pair of cleans, but they need to be, they still need to be aged and worked on. This album, it's totally went great with Create. It's the most melodic track on the whole album, most laid back, very laid back. You still have those growls in the background, but you have Keenan just doing these really good, almost operatic at sometimes, but almost like a mid-tone, great clean. Really sets kind of an atmosphere up. You got some very Opeth cleanish vibes kind of in there. That's what I noticed a lot in this track. And then we got the other track, and I think it's Anticipate. Sorry if I fucked up the name, but this is basically I guess to a Faceless fan, the most proper introduction. This song blasts with just super fast fucking shredding guitars, and then goes into this section of where you have these really Opeth-ish sort of riffing. I remember in an interview Keenan did years ago that he wanted to tour with Opeth because he liked their music. So you definitely see a little bit of influence coming in on this track with like the Opethian riffs, even some of his like slower, his mid-tone, not much of his operatic vocal cleans sound a little bit like Mikhail Ockerfeldt from Opeth. And this track shows off really well. It's amazing, really, if you think about it. It's a brilliant track. It's the longest they've ever written. It's massive in just how much they crammed into it. It's just some absolute great riffing. The soloing on this album is even better. Whereas with the soloing on Coldly Calculated Design, it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was thrown in there, but it was thrown in at moments where it could have come a little later or a little earlier. And the soloing here, it's still got that great progressive sense in those melodies. It's definitely one of the best tracks on the album. It's massive in just size and energy. Brilliant. Then we have Discoordinate. This was the newest track that they showed off before the actual album's release. At a live show when they were doing the Metal Alliance tour with Devil Driver, 3 Inches of Blood, and Dying Fetus. I think Impending Doom and Job for a Cowboy too, not sure. And this one, it's definitely one of the more, it's even more experimental than the last two. Whereas the last two had their own kind of unique identity, this one has the same thing. Except this time it starts out very slow, like Create, but it's a little bit different. It has a saxophone that is beautifully used throughout this album, and that reminded me of something else. That reminded me of Ishan's new album, and the sax it makes that song just lift up. There's a really heavy part after a section of just really calm mellowness that gets into that heavy part. It's basically like they combined the first two tracks into this one singular one. Ideas from those first two. And this track's just amazing. It's got that great saxophone solo, which is really unique to their sound, and I really enjoy that. So the first three parts of this are absolutely just brilliant 5 out of 5 tracks. These are, like Mr. Campbell's work said, these are Keenan's most accomplished works in his entire career. They're absolutely brilliant. Then we have the rest of the tracks. Now, how is this going to hold up? Well, I'll tell you. I'm going track by track, by the way. Accelerated Evolution. This is another more technical, fast-paced song. This is pretty good. I do definitely enjoy this track. It's got some more cleans by Keenan, which is great. I love how there's much more clean vocals in this album. Where I'm not gonna lie, I like all the aggressive vocaling from like Demon Carcass back in the early albums. But I always felt like clean vocals could freshen it up a little bit. And while this also shows off some of the other members in the Faceless, their drummer, which they've had for a little bit, he's a beast. I love his drummer. It gets much more polished this time around than where it was kind of more rougher and raw, kind of like an old school. It almost reminded me of Suffocation, except a bit more technical on Planetary Duality. They have a new bassist. I love the bass tone in this album. I think it's evolved throughout the albums, where the first album it really didn't shine. The second album was much more visible. This time it's full and center. It's got that great fulfilling tone. It follows those riffs beautifully. It's really nice. Their new vocalist, who I was really skeptical about at first, I didn't know if he could replace the foot of Demon Carcass that he left behind. But he's got these great growls. I mean, he sounds like Demon Carcass, which is good. That's a good thing. For his growls. His higher ups, like his screaming, I will say Demon Carcass had the better screamed vocals, like on songs like All Dark Grays before it goes into that calm part. His screams, his higher ups remind me actually a lot of black metal, like Immortal. It's interesting. It definitely makes him more diversified than him. But he fits the band very well. You know, he goes along great with the music. He knows when to shut up. So yeah, plus for him. Let's continue on with the tracks like Accelerated Evolution, great song. Then we have the Autotheism Reality. This is the track that was released last year. I've already said my opinion about it. Pretty decent song, but I guess it's one of the weaker points of the album in my opinion. Then we have 10 Billion Years. This song along with part 2 of Autotheism Movement nearly brought me to tears. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, they're just this track has so much crammed into it, like part 2. It's got these great riffing. I mean, it's like Michael Keenan took, say this is Opeth, this cat right here, and say this is Devin Townsend with the vocal wise, and he just put those two together like this, essentially, and just combined those two with the already accomplished and polished sound of the Faceless, and just made something that was totally unique and out of the technical death metal realm. Like 10 Billion Years perfectly shows it. You got those awesome cleans. He almost has like a high operatic. You've got their new vocalist. His harshes are fantastic. This is still a heavy album, but it's the most progressive album to date. So yeah, 10 Billion Years, another standout track. Then we have the first little interludes. We have Hail Science, which is basically just like Stephen Hawking basically taking over his little spoken word part. Then we have Hymn of Sanity. This is the shortest track on the album that's actually a song. It really reminds me actually a lot of Prison Born, how it's just quick, fast, and ultra technical. Alright, that's getting way too long. Then we get the last track, In Solitude, another fantastic track. I mean, this one starts out with like an acoustic guitar, very slow, and then just builds up. It, for some reason, reminds me of Tarnished Gloomy from the new Job for a Cowboy album. But it basically builds up into one really great final. I've always said this about Faceless albums, specifically with Planetary Duality, where the last 2 tracks are very disappointing. In this case, it's not really the thing. It's more of showing 2 sides. You have the really aggressive side with Hymn of Sanity, then you have the more laid back, but still very energetic side of In Solitude. So overall, I said that my favorite death metal / extreme metal album this year was the new Cal Decapitation album. I've always said that. This one takes the cake. This is even better than that. I'm still putting that on my end of the year list, both albums, but this album is just fantastic. I absolutely love the Faces. They were one of those bands that got me into death metal, and this album is just another good stepping stone. It's longer than any album they've done before. It's more progressive. Was the wait worth it? That depends on you, how more or less you're willing to wait for a new album by them. But this is just, it's great. That's the only way I can put it. Alright, this is way too long. Subscribe and comment. Peace.